morning. Thanks for joining me this morning on Tuesday. I'm so glad that you've chosen to be here as we do a little bit more reflection on Philippians chapter 2. So find a comfortable place, take a breath, and allow your heart and mind and body to focus on God and what He might say to you through the scripture this morning. The little chunk we're going to look at today is from Philippians 2, verses 3 and 4. And it says, "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to your own interests, but to the interests of others." That word selfish ambition could actually be translated as electioneering or partisanship, the desire to put oneself forward in front of other people. I think if you want an example of what that might look like, just read the news. It's election season and there's a lot of that going on right now. That word conceit can be translated as empty pride, vainglory, or groundless self-esteem. I think if we're honest, a lot of us do a lot of things out of this conceit, empty pride. And it might not even be rooted in pride at first. It might even be because we think that we're worthless or not as good or not good enough. We do things to up our worth. We compete with others or have to do things to make up for not being good enough. Can you think of a time where at work or at school or in your home, you've done things out of empty pride to puff yourself up or make yourself more of worth in some situation? Well, Paul calls us out on that and says we need to let go of that as a motivation, presumably because Paul understands that we don't need to, and in fact, we can't increase our worth before God or in ultimate spiritual reality because God has given us all the worth that we possibly could have because we are His children and we don't find our worth in the things we do or in comparison to other people. Instead, he says, in humility, regard others as better than ourselves. Notice here that it doesn't say accept the fact that others are better than you, or decide that other people are better than you, or worry about whether other people are better than you or not. But he says, in humility, regard others as better than ourselves. True Christian humility is rooted in knowing that God sees each one of His children as fully and equally loved. But those of us who are trying to follow Jesus in humility, we choose to act as if others were better than us. Again, in God's eyes, other people are not actually better than us, but the practice that we are being invited into is to regard others, to act as if others are better than us, so that we could be more like Jesus. Another way that Paul says this is the very next verse. He says, "Let each of you look not to your own interests, but to the interests of others." Let me ask you this question. How often do you look to your own interest throughout the day? I feel like it's all the time, every day. I mean, that's the world we live in. How else are we going to succeed in business or get into the right college or move ahead in our careers? But we ought to consider the fact that Jesus, who exemplifies true strength, and though He's the strongest man in the world, has become the weakest. And in the process, He turned the wisdom of the world on its head. Paul wanted the church at Philippi to stop bickering, competing, arguing, and acting selfishly. Later in chapter 4, verses 2 through 3, he names two women who've been sparring and taking up useless energy, competing and fighting with each other. And Paul pleads with them to stop. because he knows that this infighting is just detracting from the work of the church. And acting this way is not helping anyone, including these women, to become more like Jesus. So too with us. Is there a situation in your life where you have some amount of temptation to bicker and act selfishly? Can you do one thing today to look to the interests of others rather than to your own interest? Let me give you an example. My husband likes the dishwasher to be loaded in a very specific and organized way, whereas I know the truth that that's ridiculous and a complete waste of time. I'm just kidding. But I wonder what it might look like for me to put his interests above my own in a very small, but maybe not so small way of loading the dishwasher this whole week the way he wants it done and not the way I want it done. This is a wonderful practice to which God will call you many, many times in your life. And this is what prepares our hearts for a life of following Jesus, and could prepare our hearts for Service Sunday this weekend. And I want to encourage you to make it real today, to put the interests of others above ourselves. If your spouse or your housemate likes the house kept in a certain way and you like it another way, how about you look to his or her interest this week? Open up a landscape in your life today and ask God to speak to you in the whole landscape of your life. And I wonder, who might God be asking you to value in a practical way above yourself? I'll see you tomorrow.